My mother-in-law pointed across the courtroom and laughed. "She doesn't even have a lawyer," she whispered, loud enough for half the gallery to hear. A few people behind her smiled along. Then the side door opened, the judge walked in, glanced toward me, and said in a calm voice that stopped every whisper in the room, "Good morning, Colonel Mitchell." Silence. I watched Diane Mitchell's smile disappear so quickly it almost made me feel sorry for her. Almost. "My name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm 44 years old, and until 3 years ago, I wore the eagle insignia of a United States Army colonel." Most people who knew me now had no idea. That was exactly how I wanted it. To understand why one simple greeting could silence an entire courtroom, I need to go back, not to today, but to 3 years ago, when everything started falling apart quietly, the way most important things do. I lived in a small brick house on the edge of Fayetteville, North Carolina, close enough to Fort Liberty that you could hear the training helicopters some mornings if the wind was right. Most days started the same way. Coffee before sunrise. Feed our Labrador buddy. Wake my 12-year-old daughter Lily for school. Drive past the elementary school while she finished her breakfast sandwich in the passenger seat. Normal routines were comforting after everything we'd been through. My husband David had loved routines too. He used to say military families survived because someone always knew what came next. He flew helicopters for the Army National Guard, the kind of job that made small talk at parties interesting and made nights alone a little harder than people expected. Then one Tuesday morning, nothing came next. David died during a training exercise near Fort Liberty. The Army investigation ruled it an accident, a mechanical failure no one could have predicted. That didn't make it any easier to explain to a 9-year-old why her father wasn't coming home. It didn't make things easier with David's parents either. Diane and Robert Mitchell lived nearly 500 miles away, in a quiet town outside Columbus, Ohio. Robert had had heart surgery 2 years before David died, and travel wore him out in a way it hadn't used to. In the 15 years I'd known them, they had come to exactly 2 military events in my life, our wedding and David's funeral. Both times I wore civilian clothes. To them, the Army was something that happened in photographs, texted to a phone screen, not something they had ever stood inside of. They knew David flew helicopters. They knew I did something with the law. Beyond that, my career was a blank space they never thought to fill in, because it had simply never occurred to them that it mattered. At first, after David died, they seemed like the support I needed. They drove down for the funeral. They hugged Lily. They cried with us at the flag folding ceremony. For a few months, I honestly believed grief had pulled us closer together. I couldn't have been more wrong. About 6 months after the funeral, Diane began making little comments. They never should have let David fly those dangerous missions. If he'd taken that job with the airline instead, he'd still be alive. She never said it directly. She didn't have to. Every sentence carried the same accusation underneath it. "You took my son away from me." I let it go, not because I agreed, but because I understood that grief can twist good people into saying cruel things. Or at least, that's what I wanted to believe. Over time, the comments got sharper. When Lily wanted to spend weekends with her grandparents, Diane started questioning everything about how I ran our household. Why was it Lily in private school? Why hadn't I bought a bigger house? Why was I still driving a 6-year-old Honda instead of something newer? She loved comparing me to David's older brother, Mark, and his wife, Jennifer. "They've done so well for themselves," she'd say. Translation: you haven't. The funny thing was, I could have afforded a bigger house. I could have driven anything I wanted. I simply didn't care. After leaving the Army, I'd taken a quiet consulting position with a nonprofit that helped veterans navigate legal issues, benefits appeals, housing disputes, employment rights. The pay wasn't spectacular, but between my pension, David's survivor benefits, and years of careful saving, Lily and I were comfortable. Comfortable didn't impress Diane, appearances did. At Thanksgiving that year, she announced to the whole table that I'd been some kind of paperwork officer in the Army. A clerk, wasn't it? I simply passed the mashed potatoes. Under the table, my hand moved toward where David used to squeeze it during moments like this. Then I remembered he wasn't there anymore. Old habits linger long after the people connected to them are gone. "No," I said quietly. "I wasn't a clerk." She laughed. "Right, administrative something." I smiled. "If that's what you'd like to believe." She rolled her eyes. "You've always been so mysterious, Sarah." "Not mysterious," I said. "Just private." There's a difference. Very few people outside the military had ever known exactly what I'd spent 20 years doing. Even David hadn't pushed for details. He understood classified work the way military spouses learn to understand it, by not asking. He'd just look at me after a bad day and say, "Talk or quiet?" Sometimes I'd talk. Usually he'd just wrap his arms around me without another question. Those moments were enough. I'm 44 now. 2 decades in the Army's Judge Advocate General's Corps, much of it spent in criminal investigation units that most Americans never hear about, had put a few more lines on my face than my age alone would suggest. Enough that later, when a stranger called me Colonel, nobody in that courtroom would think to question it. Even though I stood there in a plain gray blazer with no medals, no rank insignia, nothing to announce who I'd been. After David's funeral, I packed every plaque, every photograph, every commendation into storage bins in the garage. Not because I was ashamed, because I wanted Lily growing up with a mother, not a retired officer. Those were never the same job to me. 6 weeks before the hearing that would upend everything, a certified envelope arrived by FedEx. Inside was a petition filed in Cumberland County Circuit Court. David's parents wanted custody of Lily. They claimed I was emotionally unfit. They alleged I isolated Lily from extended family. They questioned my financial judgment, and the part that truly stunned me, they asked the court to appoint a financial conservator to oversee David's survivor benefits, arguing I couldn't be trusted to manage them. I read the paperwork twice, then a third time. Finally, I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so unbelievably disconnected from reality. Lily was thriving, honor roll, soccer team, church choir, weekly counseling by her own choice. Her pediatrician had described her as remarkably resilient. Still, court is court. Facts don't always speak for themselves. I called Rebecca Lynn that night. Rebecca and I had gone through law school together 20 years earlier, back before either of us had chosen such different paths. She into family law here in North Carolina, me into a uniform. We hadn't spoken in almost 2 years, but some friendships don't need maintenance to survive. "Sarah, oh my God," she said when I explained. "Do you want me to represent you? I can clear my calendar." "No," I said. "I need to do this myself. But I could use an evening of your brain if you have one to spare." She laughed. "For you, always." We sat at my kitchen table for 3 hours while Lily did homework upstairs. Rebecca walked me through the differences between the military justice system I'd spent 2 decades inside and the civil family court procedures of North Carolina, service rules, evidentiary standards for custody petitions, the specific case law around grandparent standing. "Here's the thing," she said, tapping the petition. "Grandparents suing for custody from a fit parent. That's a steep hill. There's a doctrine, goes back to a Supreme Court case, Troxel v. Granville. Parents have a constitutional right to raise their own kids without interference, as long as they're fit. Courts don't just hand custody to grandparents because they don't approve of the mom's parenting style." Then why is this even going forward? Rebecca pointed at the financial conservator request. This part, they're not just asking for custody, they're asking the court to question your competence to manage David's benefits. That drags in financial fiduciary law, and it means the court can't just toss the whole thing on standing alone. You're going to have to actually litigate this. The next morning, before the first hearing date, I filed a motion to dismiss for lack of standing on the custody claim. The judge, I didn't know yet it would be someone I'd once crossed paths with, denied it in part, ruling that the financial conservatorship request required the court to examine the full picture. We were going to trial. I spent the following weeks the way I'd spent every important case of my career, organizing exhibits, drafting outlines, reviewing every text message, every email, every school record. I kept it all in a worn brown leather folder I'd carried since my Army days. Nothing fancy, just preparation. Friends encouraged me to hire an attorney, someone aggressive who could match Diane's expensive firm. I thanked them and declined. There was a reason, though I didn't say it out loud to anyone but myself. I had spent 20 years standing in courtrooms asking others to trust evidence over emotion. I intended to trust my own advice. The morning of the hearing, I drove myself downtown before sunrise, parked in the public garage on Hay Street, and stopped at the small coffee shop I'd visited for years. Black coffee, no sugar, old habit. Then I walked 3 blocks to the courthouse carrying nothing but that same worn leather folder. When I stepped into the courtroom, Diane spotted me immediately. She looked around, then behind me, waiting for an attorney to appear. no one did. Her smile spread slowly. She leaned toward Mark, just loudly enough for half the gallery to hear. She actually came alone. Then she looked at me directly. You couldn't even afford an attorney. Several people turned to watch. I met her eyes. I'm exactly where I need to be. She laughed. So you're representing yourself? I am. Her attorney, Gregory Hale, adjusted his tie and smiled with the confidence of a man expecting an easy morning. He had a reputation across the county, thorough, methodical, rarely lost. All rise. I stood quietly as the judge entered. She arranged a few files, glanced toward counsel's table, and then her eyes found mine. Her expression shifted, recognition, unmistakable. Good morning, Colonel Mitchell. Every sound in the room disappeared. Diane blinked. Wait, what? Nobody spoke for several seconds. You could almost hear people trying to make sense of what they'd just heard. Judge Eleanor Vance adjusted her glasses and looked down at the docket. Counsel, before we proceed, I want to put something on the record. Mrs. Yu. Mitchell and I have a prior professional acquaintance. She served as an expert witness in a federal matter I presided over roughly 8 years ago, before my appointment to this bench. I don't believe it bears on my impartiality here, but I want both parties aware of it and given the opportunity to object. Gregory Hale rose slowly, glancing at Diane, then back at the judge. He hesitated, clearly weighing whether to make an issue of it, and then shook his head. No objection, Your Honor. It doesn't appear related to the matters at hand. Very well, Judge Vance said. Are both parties ready to proceed? Yes, Your Honor, Hale said. The judge looked toward me. Mrs. Mitchell, you understand you're representing yourself? I do. And you've reviewed the local rules of procedure? Several times. You've read the local rules of procedure? Several times. She nodded once. I expected as much. That tiny comment wasn't meant to help me. It simply reflected history. Unfortunately for Diane, she had no idea what that history actually was. During a short recess, I stepped into the hallway. The old marble floors reminded me of courthouses I'd stood in all over the world. Washington, Fort Bragg, places I'd hoped never to revisit after retirement. Diane's heels clicked across the hallway behind me. She stopped several feet away. What is going on? She demanded. The judge. She keeps calling you Colonel. I turned. I was one. She stared at me. No. Yes. You never told us. You never asked. Her face tightened. I knew you worked for the Army. You did. I thought. I know what you thought. She folded her arms. So what exactly did you do? I hesitated. That question always carried weight. The honest answer never fit into casual conversation. I practiced law. She frowned. You were a military lawyer. Yes, mostly. She looked almost disappointed, as if she'd wanted a different answer, a smaller one. As a prosecutor? I looked through the courthouse window toward the street below. Cars moved normally. People hurried toward lunch. Life outside kept going, unaware of what was happening inside these walls. I prosecuted serious crimes. What kind? I met her eyes. The kind people don't usually ask about twice. Before she could speak again, the bailiff called us back inside. Gregory Hale's opening argument painted a careful picture. A woman who was isolated, secretive, emotionally distant, and who used her military background as a shield against explanation. Mrs. Mitchell has struggled to maintain healthy relationships because of experiences she refuses to discuss, he said. He called Diane first. She walked to the stand with more competence than she'd shown all morning, took the oath, and settled in. Mrs. Mitchell, Hale began gently. Why are you asking this court for custody of your granddaughter? Diane glanced toward the gallery. Because I love her. No objection. Love wasn't in dispute. And why do you believe Sarah is unable to provide the stability Lily needs? Ever since my son died, she's become withdrawn. Diane dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. She isolates Lily. Can you explain? She rarely brings Lily to family gatherings anymore. I wrote one note. Rarely, not never. She keeps secrets, Diane continued. What kind of secrets? I honestly don't know. A few people in the gallery chuckled softly. Even Diane seemed to realize how that sounded. She rushed to explain. I mean, she never tells anyone anything. I don't know where she goes. I don't know who she talks to. I don't know what she really did in the Army. She looked toward me. For years, I believed she did paperwork. Apparently, I was wrong. Did Sarah ever intentionally mislead your family? I believe she did. How? by pretending to be ordinary. The sentence hung awkwardly in the air. Judge Vance looked over her glasses. Hale wisely changed direction. Has Lily ever expressed fear around her mother? No. That answer surprised me because it was honest. Has Sarah ever struck Lily, neglected her, failed to provide food, housing, education, or medical care? No. 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 So your concern isn't abuse? No. Then what is it? Diane answered quietly. She isn't emotionally available. There it was. The real accusation, not something measurable, just a feeling. Hale finished his direct examination. Your witness. I walked toward the stand, carrying only a yellow legal pad. No dramatic pause, just another conversation. Good afternoon, I said. Diane looked uncomfortable. Hello, I only have a few questions. I opened my notebook. You testified we've grown distant. How many times have you asked to visit Lily in the past 12 months? She frowned. I don't remember. I do. I glanced at the page. 19. You declined 14 invitations. Hale stood. Objection, counsel is testifying. I'll gladly provide the supporting emails, I said, still looking at Diane. Judge Vance nodded. Overruled. I handed copies to the bailiff. You were invited for Thanksgiving, I continued. Silence. For Lily's school concert. Silence. For her birthday. Correct. Diane finally admitted. You chose not to attend. I was busy. You were on a cruise. She looked down. Yes. No further explanation needed. A few quiet, human laughs came from the gallery. You also testified I isolate Lily. Does Lily participate in soccer? Yes. Church choir? Yes. Summer camp? Sleepovers? Yes. Summer camp? Sleepovers? Yes. So she's socially active? Yes. Honor roll student? Yes. Rasisha's regular counseling after losing her father. Counseling you personally recommended? Diane hesitated. Yes. I let a beat pass. Thank you. She shifted in her seat, the confidence from earlier fading. Then I asked the question I'd been saving. Diane, when David was alive, how many times did you ask him what I actually did in the army? She blinked. One time. 5, I said quietly. Nothing ever came of it, did it? No. You assumed. I suppose I did. You never asked me either. No. You assumed. I suppose I did. You never asked me either. No. So if you misunderstood my career, I let the sentence finish itself. That wasn't because I lied, Diane said, her voice thinner now. No, I agreed. Thank you. No further questions. Hale stood for redirect but paused, looking down at his notes, then back at me, uncertain for the first time all day. He asked Diane only 3 brief questions before excusing her. That was unusual. Very unusual. Susan Reyes had lived across the street from Lily and me for 6 years. I genuinely liked Susan, which made seeing her name on the witness list painful. Mrs. Reyes, Hale asked, have you observed Sarah keeping to herself? She's private, Susan said, nodding. And does she socialize often? Not much. Thank you. I approached slowly. Susan, we've borrowed sugar from each other before, haven't we? She laughed despite herself, more than once. You've watched Buddy when Lily and I traveled. Yes, I've watched your grandchildren. You have. When my water heater burst, you helped me clean the basement, brought over your shop vac. I did. When your husband had knee surgery, I drove him to physical therapy for 6 weeks. Susan smiled warmly. You did. So when you described me as private, I didn't mean unfriendly, she said, before I could even finish. I meant you don't gossip. The courtroom laughed, even Judge Vance smiling briefly. Sarah doesn't talk much about herself, Susan continued, unprompted, but she shows up whenever someone needs help. Hale closed his eyes for half a second. He hadn't expected that answer. Neither had Diane. That afternoon, Hale called Mark Mitchell to the stand. Unlike his mother, Mark looked almost pleased, walking up, polished as always, tailored suit, the kind of man who never seemed to sweat even in a warm courtroom. That bothered me because Mark had always been smarter than he let people believe. Mr. Mitchell, Hale asked, how would you describe Sarah's relationship with your family since your brother passed? It changed, Mark said. She slowly pushed us away. Did that concern you? It did. Lily lost her father. I didn't want her losing her grandparents too. It was a good answer, reasonable, measured, exactly the kind of testimony judges hear every day. Then Hale introduced a stack of printed text messages. I'd like to enter Petitioner's Exhibit 12. The pages were handed to the judge, then to me. I recognized them immediately. A conversation between Mark and me from 18 months earlier. Except something felt wrong. I scanned the pages. My stomach tightened. Several messages were missing. Not altered, removed. The conversation had been edited. These messages, Hale continued, demonstrate Mrs. Mitchell repeatedly refusing family contact. Judge Vance looked toward me. Any objection? Not to authenticity, Your Honor. To completeness. Explain. The conversation has been selectively printed. Hale frowned. They're accurate. I didn't say they weren't, I said, standing. They're incomplete. I reached into my leather folder. I anticipated this. The bailiff distributed my copies. The full exchange, dozens of pages longer. One message read, Mark, Mom's upset. Give her a little time. My response, of course. Tell her she's welcome for dinner next Sunday. Lily misses everyone. Another, Sarah, sorry, we're going to the beach that weekend. Maybe next month. Another, later, Mark. Lily's school play is Friday. We'd love to have you there. No response. The silence in the courtroom became uncomfortable. Judge Vance looked toward counsel's table. Mr. Hale, he stood quickly. Your Honor, I was provided only the documents my clients supplied. I understand, the judge said, her voice calm but pointed. This court prefers complete conversations. So do I. Cross-examination began. I walked toward Mark. Good afternoon, Mark. He forced a smile. Sarah. We've known each other almost 16 years. That's right. You've always considered yourself an honest man. I try to be. I believe you. That surprised him. It also relaxed him. People answer differently when they don't expect an attack. You testified I stopped communicating. Did I invite your family to Lily's 10th birthday? Yes. Her 5th grade graduation? Christmas dinner? Yes. Yes. You declined every time. Yes. Yes. You declined every time. He hesitated. We had other plans. Do you remember calling me last October asking whether Lily could stay with you for a weekend? I do. And what did I say? He looked uncomfortable. You agreed without hesitation, so I trusted you enough to let her come. Does that sound like someone trying to destroy family relationships? He didn't answer. You may answer, Judge Vance said. No, Mark said quietly. I paused, then lowered my voice. Mark, you know I was a colonel, don't you? The courtroom stilled. He was silent for a long moment. I know, he finally said. I was standing there when David pinned the rank on your shoulders. Then why? I asked. Have you never told your mother? Mark looked down at his hands. Because Mom needed someone to blame. It was easier than accepting that nobody was at fault for David's death. If she knew who you really were, what you'd actually done, what you'd actually sacrificed, she couldn't hate you anymore. And she needed to hate someone. Diane's face drained of color. Mark. He looked toward her. I told you we shouldn't do this. You said she'd never fight back. Diane whispered sharply. I thought you were wrong, Mark said. But it was too late. The hearing recessed for 15 minutes. I stepped into the hallway needing fresh air. The courthouse windows overlooked the street below. State employees crossing sidewalks with takeout lunches, a city bus rumbling past. Life continued. Mine felt suspended. I leaned against the wall and closed my eyes for just a moment. I wasn't in Fayetteville anymore. I was back overseas, in a different courtroom, different witnesses, different families waiting for answers. I remembered the faces of mothers who would never see their sons again, young soldiers testifying through tears. Those memories never truly disappear. You simply learn where to keep them. Colonel. I opened my eyes. Standing in front of me was James Wu. Older now, more gray in his hair, still standing perfectly straight. Jimmy, I said, it's been too long. It has. James and I had worked together for almost 8 years, back when he was a senior Army criminal investigator. We'd interviewed hundreds of witnesses side by side. Heard your name was on today's docket, he said. I was already in town. Thought you might appreciate a familiar face. Before I could answer, the bailiff appeared. Mrs. Mitchell, the judge has approved your witness request. James looked at me. You finally decided. I didn't want to, I said, but I have to. Back inside, I called my first witness. James Wu took the oath. How do we know each other? I asked. We worked together. Almost 8 years. What was my role? Lead prosecutor. What kinds of cases? He took a slow breath. The hardest ones? War crimes, corruption, abuse investigations. The courtroom was silent. Diane looked completely lost. Did you ever observe me ignoring evidence to protect someone's reputation? No. Did I ever decline a case because the accused held a high rank? He almost smiled. No. In fact, he looked toward the bench. She prosecuted a 2-star general. The room seemed to hold its breath. Hale stood. Objection, relevance. It goes to my character for honesty and integrity, which the petition directly challenges, I said. Overruled, Judge Vance said. I kept the rest of James's testimony narrow, deliberately. This wasn't about celebrating a career. It was about answering one accusation. Did you ever see me lose control of my emotions in a professional setting? Behave in a way that endangered anyone in your care? Never once, James said. Not even on the worst days. Sarah was the calmest person in every room she ever walked into. Later, during a quiet moment, I let myself think about why Gregory Hale, clearly a thorough attorney, had never uncovered any of this before trial. I found out afterward that he had, in fact, requested my service record weeks earlier. What came back was 3 lines. Judge Advocate General's Corps. United States Army. Honorably discharged. Much of my later assignment history, tied to sensitive investigative work, simply wasn't part of any record a civilian attorney could pull. To a man used to building cases from paper trails, 3 quiet lines looked like nothing worth chasing. My final witness before the Guardian ad litem's testimony was Chaplain Robert Foster, a man I hadn't seen in nearly a decade. His hair was gray now, neatly combed, and he still carried himself like the officer he'd once been. It's good to see you again, Chaplain, I said. You too, Colonel. Diane closed her eyes for a second. I had a feeling she was tired of hearing that title. How do we know one another? I asked. We served together for nearly 4 years. What was your role? Senior chaplain assigned to the command. I kept my questions tight, aimed squarely at the accusation on the table. In 4 years of working alongside me under some of the worst conditions imaginable, did you ever see me lose emotional control? Behave erratically? Show any sign of the instability described in this petition? Never, he said simply. I watched her sit with grieving families for hours after difficult verdicts. I watched her help young soldiers find counseling after testifying. People assume prosecutors enjoy winning. Sarah never saw it that way. She believed justice wasn't about defeating someone, it was about protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. He paused. If anything, Your Honor, she was the steadiest person I ever served with. I felt my throat tighten. I hadn't expected that. Truthfully, I wasn't sure I deserved it. No further questions, I said quietly. As the chaplain stepped down, I noticed Lily's name appear on the docket for the next matter, not to testify herself but through the woman appointed weeks earlier to speak for her interests alone. Denise Alvarez, the Guardian ad litem, took the stand. She was a small, precise woman with reading glasses pushed up into gray-streaked hair. I'd met her twice during the case. The first time, she'd been cautious with me, almost skeptical. Miss Mystical, Alvarez, Hale said, standing for his portion of her testimony, you were appointed by this court to represent the child's interests independently. Can you describe your initial impressions of this case? Honestly? I had questions, Denise said. Mrs. Mitchell's background was thin in the file. Vague job history, gaps I couldn't easily explain. That raised flags for me initially. I don't take custody matters lightly, and I don't take secrecy lightly either. And your conclusions now? My conclusions are based on one thing above all else, Denise said, what the child wants and what the child needs, which aren't always the same, but in this case, they align. She turned toward the bench. I met with Lily privately, twice, without her mother present. I asked her directly who she wanted to live with, if she could choose freely. Denise paused. She didn't hesitate for a second. She said, I want to stay home with my mom and Buddy. The courtroom was completely still. Then, Denise continued, her voice softening, she asked me something I haven't stopped thinking about since. She said, can you tell my grandma I still love her? I just don't want to have to choose. I felt my eyes sting. I didn't look at Diane. I couldn't, not yet. In my professional opinion, Denise said, there is no evidence supporting the allegations in this petition. Lily is safe, thriving, and deeply loved. Removing her from her home would serve no one's interests except the adults fighting over her. Gregory Hale stood for what would become his final argument. To his credit, he didn't exaggerate. He acknowledged that I had provided a safe home. He admitted Lily loved me deeply. He conceded there was no evidence of abuse, neglect, or financial misconduct. Instead, he argued that Diane and Robert simply believed they could offer Lily a stronger extended family environment. It was a reasonable argument, just not one supported by the facts. When it was my turn, I walked slowly to the podium. I didn't carry notes. I didn't need them. "Your Honor," I began, "I've spent most of my adult life asking courts to look past emotion and examine evidence. This case deserves the same respect." I took a slow breath. My in-laws loved my husband. I have never questioned that. They love Lily. I don't question that either. I looked briefly toward Diane. They lost a son. I lost my husband. Lily lost her father. Grief doesn't belong to one side. The courtroom remained completely still. But grief also doesn't give any of us permission to rewrite reality. I gestured toward the exhibits. The evidence shows I encouraged contact. It shows Lily is healthy. It shows she succeeds in school. It shows she has friends. It shows she is receiving counseling. It shows she is loved. I paused. My military career isn't why I should keep custody. It simply explains why I stayed calm when accusations were made. I let another beat pass. I'm not asking this court to reward me for serving. I'm asking it to let my daughter continue growing up in the stable home she's always known. Then I turned to a matter I hadn't raised until now. Your Honor, I'd also like to formally move for sanctions under Rule 11 related to Petitioner's Exhibit 12. Not because I won or lost this case on its merits, but because this court was presented with evidence that had been deliberately altered to misrepresent the truth. That isn't a disagreement about interpretation. That's a decision made by someone to remove context in order to mislead a judge. Judge Vance made a no without looking up. "That's all," I said, and returned to my seat. For several long minutes, Judge Vance reviewed her notes. No one spoke. Finally, she removed her glasses. "The court is prepared to rule." Every heartbeat in the room seemed louder. This case is not about wealth. It is not about military service. It is not about social standing. It is about the best interests of one child. She reviewed the evidence point by point: school records, medical records, counseling reports, witness testimony, the Guardian ad, litem's independent findings. Then she looked directly at Diane. "The petitioner has failed to establish that Mrs. Purton Mitchell is an unfit parent. The evidence overwhelmingly demonstrates the opposite. The petition for custody is denied." I closed my eyes for 1 second. Not in triumph, in relief. "The court also finds," Judge Vance continued, "that Petitioner's Exhibit 12 was presented to this court in a materially incomplete and misleading form. The motion for sanctions is granted. Petitioners are ordered to reimburse a substantial portion of the court costs associated with this proceeding, and Mr. Hale's firm is directed to review its document verification procedures going forward." It wasn't punishment, it was accountability. This matter is concluded. Outside the courthouse, late afternoon sunlight reflected off the windows across the street. A few local reporters waited near the front steps. Apparently someone had mentioned the unusual hearing. One approached me. "Mrs. Mitchell, may I ask one question?" "Of course. Why didn't you ever tell your husband's family you were a colonel?" I looked toward Lily, who was laughing while Buddy, picked up earlier from the neighbor's house, chased a squirrel across the courthouse lawn. "Because rank isn't who you are," I said. "It's just a job you once had. What mattered most to me was being David's wife." I smiled. "Now it's being Lily's mother." The reporter thanked me and stepped aside. As we reached the parking garage, I heard someone call my name. "Sarah." I turned. Diane stood several yards away. She looked smaller somehow, not physically, emotionally. For the first time in years, she wasn't trying to win. She walked over slowly. "I owe you an apology." I waited. I spent 3 years believing things that weren't true. Tears filled her eyes. "I was angry. I needed someone to blame." She looked down. "And blaming you was easier than accepting I couldn't save my son." Neither of us spoke for several moments. Finally, I nodded. "I know." She looked surprised. "I don't hate you, Diane. I never did." She wiped her eyes. "I don't expect forgiveness." "I know." Another long silence. Then she looked toward Lily. "May I call her sometime?" I smiled gently. "You never had to ask." Her shoulders dropped as if she'd been carrying something unbearably heavy. Maybe she had. We weren't suddenly one happy family. Real life doesn't work that way. Trust isn't rebuilt in one conversation. It returns slowly, phone call by phone call, birthday by birthday, small choices repeated over time. Mark found me a few steps later, near my car. He didn't say much at first, just stood there with his hands in his pockets. I should have told her the truth a long time ago, he finally said. About who you were. About what David told me. I let her keep believing what was easier. You told the truth today, I said. That's what mattered. He nodded, and for once, the polish slipped just enough to show something real underneath it. For what it's worth, David was proud of you. He told me that more than once. I don't think he ever said it to your face enough. I didn't trust my voice for a moment. He didn't have to, I said finally. I knew. 6 months later, Diane attended Lily's 7th grade choir concert. She sat quietly in the second row, watching my daughter sing with the kind of focus that told me she was really listening, not just performing politeness. Afterward, she hugged Lily. Then she hugged me. It was awkward, a little stiff, and completely genuine. Robert came too, slower on his feet than I remembered, leaning on a cane he hadn't needed the last time I'd seen him. He shook my hand instead of hugging me, which felt right somehow, a small, honest gesture instead of a performance of closeness we hadn't earned yet. As for me, I went back to my work helping veterans navigate legal problems most of them never expected to face. Some afternoons I'd sit across from a young soldier who believed his whole life had fallen apart over one bad decision, one bad diagnosis, one bad year. I'd listen. I'd offer practical advice. I'd remind him that today's setback didn't have to define tomorrow. In many ways, I was telling myself the same thing. Looking back now, I understand that revenge was never what satisfied me. The satisfaction came from refusing to become the person grief expected me to become. The truth didn't need anger to win. It only needed patience, preparation, and the courage to stand quietly until it was finally heard. Lily still doesn't fully understand everything I did during those 20 years, and I've made peace with that. Some evenings she'll ask a small question, what a JAG officer actually does, what it was like testifying in front of generals, and I answer as much as feels right for a 12-year-old to carry. The rest I still keep in storage bins in the garage, next to the photographs and the folded flag, not hidden, just held quietly, the way you hold things that matter too much to display and too much to throw away. One evening, not long ago, Lily found the old leather folder sitting on my desk, the one I'd carried into that courtroom. She ran her fingers along the worn edge. "Mom," she said, "were you scared, going in there without a lawyer?" I thought about it honestly before answering, a little, but being scared and being unprepared are two different things. I wasn't unprepared. She smiled. David's smile, the same one that used to appear right before he said something that made everything feel lighter. I want to be like that when I grow up. You already are, I told her. You just don't know it yet. If this story stayed with you, I hope it reminds you of something simple. Dignity often speaks louder than pride, and the people who carry the heaviest histories are rarely the ones who need to announce them. Sometimes the quietest person in the room has already survived the loudest storms, and still chose, every single day afterward, to come home gently.